The rain came down in sheets that October afternoon in Portland, turning the sidewalks dark and slick. 8-year-old Sophie Bennett stood outside Morrison's Antiques, her small hands wrapped around a porcelain doll that had been her most treasured possession since she was 3 years old. The doll's painted blue eyes stared up at her, and Sophie felt her stomach twist with guilt and fear. Inside her red raincoat pocket was a crumpled hospital bill with numbers so large they made her dizzy. Her mother had hidden it under a stack of papers, but Sophie had found it while looking for her homework folder. Sophie's fingers were numb from the cold, but she couldn't bring herself to step inside the shop. Through the window, she could see well-dressed people browsing through expensive furniture and vintage items, their clothes dry and warm. They looked like they belonged in a different world from hers. The doll in her arms had a small crack along its cheek, and its white lace dress was yellowed with age, but it had been her grandmother's before it was hers. Grandma Helen had died when Sophie was 5, and this doll was all she had left of her. But her mother was dying too. That's what Sophie had overheard the doctors saying when she'd pressed her ear against the hospital room door last week. Julie Bennett's kidneys were failing, and the insurance company had denied coverage for the experimental treatment that might save her life. The regular dialysis was keeping her alive, but barely, and the medical bills were drowning them. Sophie had watched her mother cry over unopened envelopes, had seen her skip meals so Sophie could eat, had heard her make phone calls late at night begging for payment plans. A man in an expensive gray coat walked past Sophie and into the antique shop, and she caught a glimpse of the warm interior. The shopkeeper, an older man with white hair, was showing him a vintage pocket watch. Sophie took a deep breath and followed him inside, her wet shoes squeaking on the polished floor. The shopkeeper looked up, his expression shifting from welcoming to uncertain when he saw the small, soaked child. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone suggesting he doubted she belonged there. Sophie held up the doll with shaking hands. "I need to sell this. Please. It's very old and special. My grandma said it was worth money." The shopkeeper walked over and examined the doll briefly. "It's a nice piece, but the crack reduces its value significantly. I could give you $40. $40. Sophie's heart sank. The hospital bill was for $12,000, and that was just the most recent one. But $40 could buy groceries for 2 weeks if she was careful. It could pay for her mother's prescription refill. It was something. "Okay," Sophie whispered, tears mixing with the rainwater on her cheeks. "Wait." The man in the gray coat stepped closer, his dark eyes kind but serious. "May I see the doll before you sell it?" What would you do if you were in Sophie's shoes? Would you sell your most precious memory to save someone you love? Comment below and subscribe to see how this story of hope and unexpected kindness unfolds. Richard Hayes had not planned to visit Morrison's Antiques that Tuesday afternoon. He had been in Portland for business meetings, and his driver had gotten stuck in traffic on Burnside Street. Rather than sit in the car, Richard decided to walk the 2 blocks to his hotel. The antique shop's window display had caught his eye, a collection of vintage toys that reminded him of his childhood in Boston. At 52, Richard had built a technology empire from nothing. Hayes Digital Systems employed 15,000 people and had made him a billionaire 3 times over. But wealth had not insulated him from pain. His father had died 6 months ago, and Richard still felt the weight of that loss every day. His father had taught him that money was meaningless if you didn't use it to make the world better. When Richard entered the shop, he'd been thinking about his father's pocket watch collection. Then he saw the little girl in the red raincoat, soaked through and shivering, holding a doll like it was made of glass. Her face was pale, her lips tinged blue from the cold, and her eyes held a desperation that made his chest tighten. "May I see the doll before you sell it?" Richard asked gently. Sophie hesitated, then handed it to him carefully. The doll was indeed old, probably from the 1950s, with delicate porcelain features and hand-painted details. The crack on its cheek could be repaired by a skilled restorer. But Richard wasn't thinking about the doll's value. He was thinking about the child's face, about the hospital bill he'd glimpsed sticking out of her pocket. "This is beautiful," Richard said. "It must be very special to you." "It was my grandma's," Sophie said quietly. "She died 3 years ago. But my mom needs help more than I need the doll." Richard's throat tightened. "What kind of help does your mother need?" Sophie looked at the shopkeeper, then back at Richard. Something in his face must have seemed trustworthy because she pulled the crumpled bill from her pocket and showed it to him. Richard scanned the document quickly. Renal failure. Dialysis. Denied claim for experimental treatment. Patient, Julie Bennett. My mom works at the hospital, Sophie explained. She's a nurse. But she got really sick last year, and she can't work anymore. The doctors say she needs a special treatment that costs a lot of money, but our insurance said no. I thought if I sold my doll, it could help a little bit. Richard looked at this brave little girl who was willing to give up her most precious possession for $40 toward a $12,000 bill, knowing it wouldn't make a real difference but trying anyway. He thought about his father, who had been hospitalized for pneumonia 2 years before he died. The nurses had been kind, especially one woman who had stayed late to sit with his father when Richard couldn't be there. He couldn't remember her name, but he remembered her compassion. Sophie, Richard said, having caught her name when the shopkeeper addressed her. I want to buy your doll, but I need to think about the right price. Can you meet me here tomorrow at the same time? I promise I'll have an answer for you then. Sophie's face crumpled with disappointment, and Richard realized she'd been hoping for immediate help. I understand if you don't want it, she said, reaching for the doll. No, I do want it, Richard said quickly. Very much. But something this special deserves careful consideration. I'll pay you for your time. He pulled out his wallet and handed her $200 in crisp bills. This is a deposit. To show I'm serious. Use it for whatever your mother needs right now. Sophie stared at the money like she'd never seen currency before. This is so much. It's a deposit, Richard repeated. Tomorrow, same time. Can you be here? Yes, Sophie breathed. Thank you. Thank you so much. She clutched the money and ran from the shop, the doll still in Richard's hands. The shopkeeper raised his eyebrows. That was generous. You know that doll isn't worth more than $75, even fully restored. I know, Richard said. He pulled out a business card and handed it to the shopkeeper. If she comes back before I do tomorrow, call this number immediately. And don't let anyone else talk to her about that doll. The shopkeeper looked at the card, and his eyes widened. Everyone in Portland knew the name Richard Hayes. Of course, Mr. Hayes. Whatever you need. Richard left the shop with the doll, and walked back into the rain. He had his assistant on the phone before he reached his car. I need everything you can find on a nurse named Julie Bennett at one of the Portland hospitals. And I need it tonight. That evening, Richard sat in his hotel suite overlooking the Willamette River, reading the report his assistant had compiled. Julie Bennett, 34 years old, had worked as a registered nurse at Providence Portland Medical Center for 8 years. Single mother. No family in the area. Her employment records showed she'd taken a leave of absence 11 months ago due to her illness. Her personnel file included commendations for excellent patient care and going above and beyond her duties. There was a note from 3 years ago. Julie had stayed 4 hours past her shift to sit with an elderly patient who was frightened and alone. The patient's family had written a thank you letter to the hospital administration, praising Julie's kindness during his final days. Richard read that letter 3 times. The elderly patient had been his father, Thomas Hayes. Richard sat back in his chair, stunned. The nurse who had comforted his father during that difficult hospitalization, who had made his last years more bearable, was now lying in a hospital bed herself, dying because she couldn't afford treatment. The universe had brought her daughter to him, had given him a chance to repay a debt he hadn't known he owed. He picked up the phone and called Dr. Stephen Morrison, head of nephrology at Oregon Health Sciences University. They'd served together on a medical research charity board. Steve, I need your help with something. The next afternoon, Sophie returned to Morrison's Antiques at exactly 3 o'clock. She was wearing the same red raincoat, but it had been washed, and her blonde hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. She looked nervous but hopeful. Richard was waiting inside with the doll. I'm sorry I'm a little late, Sophie said breathlessly. I had to take the bus from school. You're right on time, Richard assured her. Come sit down. I want to talk to you about something important. They sat in 2 chairs near the shop's window. Richard had asked the shopkeeper to give them privacy, and the older man had agreed readily. Sophie perched on the edge of her seat, her hands folded in her lap. Sophie, I want to know more about your mother, Richard said. Tell me about her. Sophie's face brightened despite her worry. She's the best mom in the world. She works really hard. Before she got sick, she worked at the hospital during the day and cleaned offices at night so we could have a nice apartment. She always makes sure I have everything I need for school. She helps me with homework even when she's tired. She never complains. What happened when she got sick? She started feeling really tired all the time. Then she got really puffy, especially her face and hands. She went to the doctor, and they said her kidneys weren't working right. She had to stop working because she was too sick. Now she goes to dialysis 3 times a week, and it makes her feel awful. The doctors say there's a new treatment that could help her kidneys get better, but it costs too much money. Richard nodded slowly. Your mother must be very proud of you. Coming here to try to help her took a lot of courage. I just don't want her to die, Sophie whispered, her eyes filling with tears. She's all I have. If she dies, I don't know what will happen to me. Richard felt his heart break for this child. Sophie, I want to help you. Not just with buying the doll, but with everything. I want to make sure your mother gets the treatment she needs. Sophie's eyes went wide. But that costs so much money. I don't think the doll is worth that much. You're right, it's not. But I'm not just buying a doll. I'm investing in hope. Your mother once helped someone very important to me when he was sick and scared. She probably doesn't even remember it, because that's just who she is. Someone who helps people without expecting anything in return. Now it's my turn to help her. Who was it? Sophie asked. Who did my mom help? My father. 3 years ago, when he was in the hospital. Your mother stayed late to sit with him because he was alone and frightened. That kindness meant everything to my family. Sophie started crying in earnest now. My mom talks about how important it is to be kind to people. She says you never know what someone is going through. Richard pulled out an envelope from his jacket pocket. Inside this envelope is information about a doctor who specializes in the treatment your mother needs. His name is Dr. Stephen Morrison, and is expecting your mother at Oregon Health Sciences University next Monday. All of her medical expenses will be covered. Every single one. Sophie took the envelope with shaking hands. I don't understand. Why would you do this? Because your mother showed my father kindness when he needed it most. Because you were brave enough to try to save her by selling your most precious possession. Because this is what we're supposed to do for each other. Richard handed her the doll. Keep this. Your grandmother wanted you to have it, and you should never have to give up something that means so much to you. But I can't take all this, Sophie protested, even as she clutched the doll to her chest. It's too much. Yes, you can, Richard said firmly but gently. And you will. Your mother taught you about kindness, didn't she? Part of kindness is being able to receive help when you need it. Let me do this. Let me help your family. Sophie nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't even know your name. I'm Richard Hayes. And Sophie, this is just the beginning. I'm going to make sure you and your mother have everything you need. Richard spent the next 3 days working with Dr. Morrison to arrange Julie's care. The experimental treatment involved a combination of stem cell therapy and targeted medication designed to regenerate kidney function. It had shown promising results in clinical trials, but wasn't yet approved for general insurance coverage. The cost was staggering, nearly $200,000 over 6 months, but Richard didn't hesitate. He also looked into Sophie and Julie's living situation. They rented a small apartment in southeast Portland, and their landlord had started eviction proceedings due to unpaid rent. Julie's medical leave was unpaid, and her savings were gone. Sophie's school record showed she was a straight-A student, but she'd been missing classes to visit her mother at the dialysis center. Richard had his legal team handle the eviction issue, paying off the back rent in 6 months in advance. He arranged for a home health aide to help Julie when she was discharged from the hospital. He set up a trust fund for Sophie's education. But he did all of this quietly, working through his charitable foundation, so Julie wouldn't feel overwhelmed or indebted. Dr. Morrison called Richard on Friday afternoon. I reviewed Julie Bennett's medical files. She's a good candidate for the treatment, but we need to start immediately. Her kidney function is deteriorating rapidly. If we wait much longer, She'll need a transplant, and the waiting list is years long. How soon can you admit her? Monday morning. I've already contacted her current nephrologist. He's supportive of the plan. What are her chances? Dr. Morrison paused. If we'd started this treatment 6 months ago, I'd say 90% success rate. At this stage, I'd estimate 60 to 70%. But without it, she has maybe a year to live, and that year will be hard. This treatment is her best hope. Richard thought about Sophie's face, about how much that little girl had already lost. Do whatever it takes, Steve. Use every resource available. Money is not a concern. I appreciate that, Richard. But you should know, even with unlimited resources, there are no guarantees in medicine. I understand. Just give her the best possible chance. On Saturday, Richard visited Providence Portland Medical Center. He asked to speak with Julie's former supervisor in the nursing department. The woman, Brenda Walsh, met him in a conference room. Mr. Hayes, it's an honor, Brenda said, clearly surprised by his visit. How can I help you? I'm here about Julie Bennett. She was one of your nurses. Brenda's face softened with concern. Yes, Julie. She's one of the best nurses I've ever supervised. It broke my heart when she got sick. How do you know her? Her daughter tried to sell a doll to help pay for medical treatment. The situation came to my attention, and I've arranged for Julie to receive the care she needs. But I want to understand who I'm helping. What can you tell me about her? Brenda leaned forward. Julie is special. She's the nurse who remembers every patient's name, who stays late to hold someone's hand, who brings in books and magazines from home for patients who have nothing. She grew up in foster care, so she knows what it's like to be alone and scared. That made her incredibly empathetic. Foster care? Richard asked, surprised. That detail hadn't been in his background report. Yes. She aged out of the system at 18 and put herself through nursing school while working full-time. She had Sophie when she was 26, and the father left before Sophie was born. Julie has done everything alone, and she's done it with grace and determination. When she got sick, so many patients asked about her. She touched a lot of lives here. Richard felt even more certain about his decision. Thank you for telling me this. One more question. Do you remember a patient named Thomas Hayes from about 3 years ago? Brenda thought for a moment. Elderly gentleman. Pneumonia? Yes, I remember. He was very frightened because his condition was more serious than his family initially realized. Julie spent a lot of time with him. She said he reminded her of the foster father she'd had briefly as a teenager, the only one who'd been kind to her. Richard's eyes burned with unexpected emotion. His father had often talked about that hospitalization, about the nurse who had treated him with such dignity and compassion. She made my father's final years more peaceful. Now I have the chance to help her. I want her to have a job back when she's well enough to return. Can you make that happen? Absolutely, Brenda said without hesitation. I've kept a position open, hoping she'd recover. She'll always have a place here. Actually, I have something else in mind. But we'll discuss that later. Sunday evening, Richard asked his assistant to arrange a meeting with Julie Bennett at the hospital. He wanted to explain everything before the treatment began. Sophie had told her mother about the generous man who had helped them, but Julie didn't yet know who he was or the full extent of what he planned to do. Richard arrived at the hospital at 6 o'clock. Julie was in a semi-private room, hooked up to and for. She looked thin and tired, her dark blonde hair pulled back from a face that was puffy from fluid retention. But her blue eyes were alert and intelligent, and when Richard entered, she straightened up as much as she could. Mrs. Bennett, I'm Richard Hayes, he said, extending his hand. Julie's eyes widened in recognition. The Richard Hayes? Sophie said a nice man helped us, but she didn't mention you were. I didn't realize. Please, call me Richard. He sat in the chair beside her bed. I want to talk to you about the help I've arranged, and I want you to understand why I'm doing this. Sophie told me about your father, Julie said softly. But honestly, I don't remember specifically taking care of him. I've helped so many patients over the years. That's exactly why I want to help you. Because kindness was so natural to you that you don't even remember it. My father was Thomas Hayes. He died 6 months ago, but he talked about his time in the hospital and how one nurse made him feel less afraid. He described you perfectly, the nurse with kind eyes who brought him word search puzzles and sat with him when he couldn't sleep. Tears welled up in Julie's eyes. I remember word search puzzles. I used to bring them from home for patients who seemed lonely. You made my father's last years better. You gave him dignity and comfort when he was vulnerable. That's priceless. Now you need help, and I'm in a position to give it. Please let me do this. The treatment Dr. Morrison described cost nearly $200,000, Julie said. I can't possibly accept that. I'll never be able to pay you back. I'm not asking you to pay me back. I'm asking you to accept help so you can be there for your daughter. Sophie needs you. She's 8 years old, and she shouldn't have to face the world alone. Julie started crying, covering her face with her hands. I'm so scared. I've tried so hard to be strong for her, to not let her see how worried I am. But I'm terrified of dying and leaving her with no one. Richard felt his own eyes sting. That's not going to happen. Dr. Morrison is the best in his field. The treatment has excellent success rates. You're going to get through this. Why are you really doing this? Julie asked, looking up at him. People don't just hand out $200,000 because someone was nice to their father 3 years ago. Richard considered his answer carefully. My father taught me that wealth is a responsibility, not just a privilege. He always said that money should flow toward need, toward making the world better. When I saw Sophie in that antique shop, trying to sell her doll for $40 toward a mountain of debt, I saw a child who understood sacrifice and love. I saw a mother who had raised someone that brave and kind despite facing incredible hardships alone. I saw an opportunity to do something meaningful. But it's so much, Julie protested weakly. To you, yes. To me, it's a fraction of what I spent last year on technology upgrades for my company. Money is just numbers in an account unless you use it to change lives. Let me change your life. Let me help Sophie keep her mother. Julie was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay, I'll accept your help. And I promise that when I'm well, I'll find ways to pay this kindness forward. I'll help others the way you're helping me. That's all I ask, Richard said, relieved. Dr. Morrison will start the treatment tomorrow. I've also arranged for you to stay with a woman named Patricia Foster while you recover. She's a retired teacher, very kind, and she lives near the hospital. Sophie can stay with her too, so you'll be together. You've thought of everything, Julie said, amazed. I've tried. You focus on getting well. Everything else is taken care of. Have you ever received unexpected help when you needed it most? How did it change your life? Subscribe and share your story in the comments. Your experience might inspire someone today. Julie was admitted to Oregon Health Sciences University early Monday morning. Dr. Morrison's team ran a series of tests to establish baselines before beginning the experimental treatment. Sophie sat in the waiting room with Patricia Foster, the kind woman Richard had arranged to host them. Patricia was in her mid-60s, with silver hair and a warm smile. She'd been a third-grade teacher for 30 years before retiring, and her home was filled with books and pictures of former students. Richard had known Patricia for years through his charitable foundation. When he'd explained the situation, she'd immediately volunteered to help. Your mother is very brave, Patricia told Sophie as they waited. And so are you. I'm scared, Sophie admitted. What if the treatment doesn't work? Then we'll face that together. But right now, we need to have hope. Hope is powerful, Sophie. It gives us strength when things are hard. Dr. Morrison came out to the waiting room at noon. Sophie, your mother is doing well. We've started the first phase of treatment. It's going to be a long process, probably 6 months, but the initial tests are encouraging. Her body is responding positively to the medications. Can I see her? Sophie asked. Of course. She's resting now, but she asked for you. Sophie hurried to her mother's room. Julie was propped up in bed, looking tired but peaceful. When she saw Sophie, her face lit up. Hi, baby. Come here. Sophie climbed carefully onto the bed and hugged her mother. Are you okay? Does it hurt? I'm okay. A little tired, but okay. The doctors say the treatment is going to help me get better. We just have to be patient. I can be patient, Sophie promised. Mrs. Foster is really nice. Her house has a cat named Buttons. Julie smiled. That sounds perfect. Remember, even when I'm here in the hospital, you're safe and cared for. Mr. Hayes made sure of that. I know. I wish I could do something for him. He's helped us so much. You can. You can be kind to other people, the way he's been kind to us. That's how kindness grows. You pass it on. Over the next 2 weeks, Julie received daily treatments. The stem cell therapy involved injections and 4 medications designed to stimulate kidney regeneration. It was exhausting, and there were days when Julie felt worse before she felt better. But Dr. Morrison's team monitored her closely, adjusting dosages and managing side effects. Other patients in the renal unit began to notice Julie's special situation. Word spread about the mysterious benefactor who had paid for her treatment. A woman named Carol Thompson, whose husband was on dialysis 3 days a week, approached Sophie in the waiting room one afternoon. Is it true that someone paid for your mother's treatment? Carol asked gently. Sophie nodded. A man named Richard Hayes. He's very kind. Carol's eyes filled with tears. My husband needs a kidney transplant, but we're still waiting for a donor. We can't afford the experimental treatment your mother is getting. I'm happy for you, but I wish everyone could have that chance. Sophie felt her heart squeeze with sympathy. She'd been so focused on her own mother's illness that she hadn't thought much about all the other families struggling with similar problems. That evening, when Richard called to check on Julie's progress, Sophie told him about Carol Thompson. There are so many sick people here, Sophie said. Mrs. Thompson's husband needs help too. Is there any way you could help them? Richard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Sophie, you have a very good heart. Let me look into it. The next day, Richard arrived at the hospital with his legal team. He met with the hospital administrator and Dr. Morrison. By the end of the week, he'd established a fund to help 3 other families in the renal unit. Carol Thompson's husband received the treatment he needed. A single mother with kidney disease got her medical bills paid. An elderly veteran received a transplant evaluation. The hospital staff started calling it the Portland Miracle. Nurses whispered about it during shift changes. Patients who'd been hopeless found new reasons to believe in recovery. And at the center of it all was Julie Bennett, the nurse who'd once given kindness freely and was now receiving it back 100-fold. As Julie's treatment progressed, something remarkable began happening at Oregon Health Sciences University. Richard's initial generosity had sparked a wave of giving throughout the Portland community. Local businesses started making donations to the hospital's charity care fund. A restaurant owner delivered free meals to families spending long hours in the waiting rooms. A group of volunteers organized a support group for children with sick parents. Sophie became friends with Grace Murphy, a 10-year-old whose father had suffered a heart attack and was recovering in the cardiac unit. Grace had dark red hair and freckles, and she loved to draw. She and Sophie spent their afternoons in the hospital's family lounge, doing homework together and creating artwork to cheer up patients. My dad's going to be okay, Grace told Sophie one afternoon. The doctors say he can go home next week. But we're scared because he can't work for a while, and my mom already works 2 jobs. Sophie thought about what her mother had told her about passing kindness forward. Maybe Mr. Hayes could help your family too. He's helping lots of people. Really? Could you ask him? When Sophie mentioned the Murphy family to Richard, he immediately agreed to help. He arranged for financial assistance to cover their bills while Grace's father, Tom Murphy, recovered. He also connected Tom with a vocational rehabilitation program that would help him transition to less physically demanding work. Tom Murphy was overwhelmed when he learned about the help. He was a construction worker, 42 years old, who'd never asked anyone for anything. But when Richard explained that accepting help allowed him to focus on healing and being there for his family, Tom reluctantly agreed. I don't know how to thank you, Tom said when Richard visited him in the hospital. This kind of help, it's life-changing. Just get well and be there for your daughter, Richard said. That's thanks enough. The connection between the Murphy and Bennett families deepened over the following weeks. Julie and Grace's mother, Linda Murphy, bonded over their shared experiences. Linda was a hairdresser who worked long hours to support her family. She'd been terrified when Tom collapsed at work, and the medical bills had piled up quickly despite their insurance. I keep thinking about how close we came to losing everything, Linda told Julie one afternoon in the hospital cafeteria. Not just Tom, but our house, our stability. It all feels so fragile. I know exactly what you mean, Julie said. Before Mr. Hayes helped us, I was planning my will and trying to figure out who would take care of Sophie if I died. I couldn't sleep at night, because of the fear. Now I have hope again. Why do you think he's doing this? Linda asked. I mean, I'm grateful, but it seems almost too good to be true. I've asked myself the same question. But I think some people are just genuinely good. They see need and they respond to it. My mom, my foster mom who I knew briefly, used to say that kindness is contagious. Maybe Mr. Hayes is starting an epidemic. In the children's lounge, Sophie and Grace were having a similar conversation. Your Mr. Hayes helped my dad, Grace said, carefully coloring a picture of a rainbow. That makes him pretty much a superhero. He's not my Mr. Hayes, Sophie protested. He's just a kind man. Well, we should do something nice for him, to say thank you. The two girls decided to make a thank you card for Richard, decorating it with drawings and messages from other families he'd helped. They collected signatures from patients and staff members. When they presented it to Richard during his next visit, he was visibly moved. This is one of the most beautiful things I've ever received, he said, studying the colorful artwork. Thank you both. We wanted you to know that what you're doing matters, Sophie said seriously. You're changing people's lives. You girls are changing lives too, Richard said. By being kind to each other, by thinking of others even when your own families are struggling. That's real courage. Patricia Foster, who'd been watching from across the room, smiled. She'd been hosting Sophie for 3 weeks now, and she'd grown to love the girls' resilience and kindness. She'd also started volunteering at the hospital, organizing activities for children whose parents were patients. What had started as a favor to Richard had become a passion project. The hospital social worker, Amanda Chen, noticed the positive atmosphere that had developed. She approached Richard one day with a proposal. What you've started here is remarkable, Mr. Hayes. But I'm wondering if we could formalize it somehow. Create a more permanent system to help families who fall through the cracks. What did you have in mind? Richard asked. A clinic specifically designed for people who have insurance that doesn't cover everything they need. A place where cost isn't the barrier to treatment. Not just for kidney disease, but for all the medical conditions that bankrupt families. Richard considered the idea. Tell me more. By the end of the second month, Julie's test results showed significant improvement. Her kidney function had increased by 30%, and the swelling in her face and hands had decreased noticeably. Dr. Morrison was cautiously optimistic. The treatment is working better than I hoped, he told Julie during a consultation. Your kidneys are regenerating faster than average. If this continues, you might not need dialysis at all within another 2 to 3 months. Julie cried with relief. I'm going to get my life back. It looks that way. But you'll need to continue treatment and follow-up care for at least a year. This isn't a quick fix, but you're definitely on the road to recovery. When Julie shared the news with Sophie, they both cried and hugged each other tightly. You're going to be okay, Mom, Sophie said. Really okay? Yes, baby. Thanks to Mr. Hayes. Richard had been visiting the hospital regularly, checking on Julie's progress and meeting with hospital administrators about the clinic proposal. On the day Julie received her good news, he came by her room to congratulate her. Julie was sitting up in a chair, looking more energetic than she had in months. Mr. Hayes, thank you for coming, Julie said. I wanted to talk to you about something important. Of course. What is it? Julie took a deep breath. I've been thinking a lot about everything you've done for us. And I realize I never fully explained how much your father's kindness meant to me back when I took care of him. You don't need to explain, Richard said gently. But I want to. You see, I grew up in foster care. Most of my childhood was spent feeling invisible and unwanted. But when I was 15, I had a foster father for about 6 months who was different. His name was William, and he treated me like I mattered. He died suddenly of a heart attack, and I went back into the system. But those 6 months taught me that kindness could change a life. Richard listened intently as Julie continued. When I became a nurse, I promised myself I'd treat every patient the way William had treated me, like they were important, like they deserved dignity and compassion. Your father reminded me so much of William. He had that same gentle way about him. Taking care of him wasn't a chore. It was an honor. My father felt the same way about you, Richard said. He told me about you several times. He said you were the kind of nurse who restored his faith in humanity. I wish I'd known he was your father. I would have tried to do even more for him. You did exactly what he needed. You gave him comfort when he was scared. You treated him like a person, not just a patient. That's everything. Julie wiped her eyes. Now you've given me the same gift, a chance to live, to be there for my daughter. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that gift. You're already worthy, Richard assured her. But I do have a proposition for you. When you're fully recovered, I'd like to offer you a position. Julie looked surprised. A position? I'm funding a new charitable clinic here in Portland. It will provide free medical care to families who fall through insurance gaps, just like you did. I need someone to run it. Someone who understands what it's like to need help, someone with medical expertise and genuine compassion. I think you're the perfect person for the job. Julie stared at him in shock. You want me to run a clinic? Not just any clinic. A place that will help hundreds of families every year. You'd oversee the medical staff, work with social workers, make sure that no one who walks through our doors gets turned away because of money. It would be challenging work, but I think you'd be brilliant at it. I don't know what to say. That's an incredible opportunity. Think about it. You don't need to decide right now. Focus on getting well first. But I wanted you to know that this is my vision for the future. A clinic inspired by your example, run by someone who truly understands what we're trying to accomplish. Julie nodded, overwhelmed. Can I ask you something? Why did you really choose me for this? Richard smiled. Because you're proof that the system works when people care enough to make it work. You were a foster kid who became a dedicated nurse. You raised a remarkable daughter while facing incredible challenges. You never lost your compassion even when you were struggling yourself. If we're going to build something that truly helps people, we need someone like you at the helm. Then my answer is yes, Julie said firmly. When I'm well enough, I'd be honored to run your clinic. Richard extended his hand, and Julie shook it. It felt like the beginning of something much bigger than either of them had imagined. 3 months after Julie began treatment, Dr. Morrison declared her kidney function had returned to nearly 80% of normal capacity. She no longer needed dialysis. The experimental treatment had succeeded beyond everyone's expectations. Julie was going home. Richard had arranged for Julie and Sophie to move into a nicer apartment near the future clinic site in East Portland. It was a 2-bedroom unit in a safe neighborhood with good schools. Patricia Foster helped them get settled, and the Murphy family came over with a home-cooked meal to celebrate. This feels like a dream, Julie said, looking around her new home. 6 months ago, I thought I was dying. Now I'm healthy, I have a job, and Sophie is thriving. It's almost too much to believe. Believe it, Linda Murphy said, setting down a dish of lasagna. You deserve every bit of happiness. Tom Murphy had fully recovered from his heart attack and was working as a safety inspector for construction sites, easy on his body, but still meaningful work. Grace had become Sophie's best friend, and the two families spent time together regularly. As Julie regained her strength, she threw herself into planning the clinic. Richard had purchased a large building that had once been a small hospital in East Portland. It needed renovation, but the bones were good. Julie worked with architects, medical supply companies, and a human resources firm to hire staff. She reached out to former colleagues, including Brenda Walsh from Providence, Portland. Many nurses volunteered to work part-time at the clinic, donating their hours to help underserved patients. Doctors from Oregon Health Sciences University agreed to rotate through, offering specialized care. Julie had a vision for the clinic that went beyond just medical treatment. She wanted it to be a community hub, a place where families could get help with everything from medical care to food assistance to job training. She worked with social service agencies to coordinate resources. The thing is, Julie explained to Richard during a planning meeting, medical problems rarely exist in isolation. If someone can't afford their heart medication, they probably also can't afford healthy food. If a kid has asthma, the family might be living in an apartment with mold. We need to address the whole person, the whole family. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need, Richard said, impressed. You're creating something truly innovative. Julie also decided that Sophie's doll, the one that had started everything, should be displayed at the clinic. She had it professionally restored and placed in a glass case in the lobby with a plaque explaining its significance. This doll represents sacrifice and hope, the plaque read. It reminds us that sometimes the smallest gestures of love can change the world. Sophie was proud to see her grandmother's doll honored this way. She'd gotten it back, and now it had an even more important purpose, inspiring others to believe in kindness. As the clinic's opening day approached, the Portland community rallied around the project. Local businesses donated furniture and equipment. A grocery store chain agreed to supply a food pantry. A law firm offered free legal services for families dealing with medical debt. The Portland Tribune ran a front-page story about the clinic and the mysterious billionaire funding it. Richard had tried to stay anonymous, but the story eventually came out. When reporters approached him, he declined to make a big deal of his involvement. This clinic exists because one little girl was willing to sacrifice her most precious possession to save her mother. It exists because a dedicated nurse showed kindness to my father when he needed it most. I'm just the person who had the resources to make it happen. But Julie insisted that the clinic be named after Richard's father. The Thomas Hayes Community Health Clinic, she proposed. To honor the man whose need for compassion started this chain of kindness. Richard was deeply touched. My father would have loved that. The Murphy family got involved too. Linda Murphy offered to provide free haircuts to patients who couldn't afford grooming services. Tom started a support group for men recovering from heart attacks and other health crises. Grace and Sophie organized a children's program where kids could do art projects and homework while their parents received medical care. Patricia Foster became the clinic's volunteer coordinator, recruiting and managing dozens of community members who wanted to help. The retired teacher found a new sense of purpose in this work, and she often said that helping Julie and Sophie had changed her life as much as it had changed theirs. I was lonely before this, Patricia admitted to Julie one day. Retirement wasn't what I expected. I missed feeling useful. Now I wake up excited to come here and help families. You've given me a gift too. Julie hugged her. We all giving gifts to each other. That's how community works. The Thomas Hayes Community Health Clinic opened on a bright Saturday morning in May. A crowd of over 200 people gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Local politicians spoke about the importance of accessible healthcare. Dr. Morrison talked about medical innovation and compassion. But the most moving speech came from Sophie Bennett. At 9 years old, Sophie stood at a podium that had been adjusted to her height. She wore a bright blue dress, and her blonde hair was pulled back with a ribbon. She looked out at the crowd with the same serious determination she'd had that rainy day outside the antique shop. Last year, my mom was really sick, Sophie began, her voice clear and steady. I thought I was going to lose her. I tried to sell my doll to help pay for her medicine, even though I knew it wouldn't be enough. But then Mr. Hayes found us. He didn't just help my mom. He helped lots of people. He showed me that one person really can make a difference. Sophie paused, looking at Julie, who stood nearby with tears streaming down her face. My mom always told me that kindness is like planting seeds. You might not see the results right away, but eventually, something beautiful grows. This clinic is what grew from all the seeds of kindness that people planted. Mr. Hayes planted seeds. My mom planted seeds when she took care of his dad. All the doctors and nurses and volunteers planted seeds. And now families who are scared and hurting will have a place to come for help. The crowd applauded, many people wiping their eyes. Richard stood at the back, overwhelmed by emotion. This 9-year-old girl had articulated his vision better than he ever could have. Julie and Richard cut the ribbon together, and the clinic officially opened. The first patients walked through the doors within minutes, families who had been waiting months for this kind of accessible care. The lobby was bright and welcoming, with colorful artwork on the walls and comfortable seating. Sophie's doll watched over everything from its glass case. The medical staff worked smoothly together, a testament to Julie's months of careful planning. Patients received thorough examinations, not rushed appointments. They got prescriptions filled on-site at no cost. They were connected with social services, job training programs, and food assistance. The clinic treated the whole person, just as Julie had envisioned. By the end of the first day, the clinic had seen 40 patients. By the end of the first week, over 200. Word spread quickly through East Portland's underserved neighborhoods. Families who had avoided seeking medical care because of cost now had a place to go. Richard visited the clinic regularly, but he always stayed in the background, letting Julie and her staff shine. He was amazed by how efficiently Julie ran the operation. She knew every patient's name, remembered details about their families, and worked with the same compassion she'd shown his father years ago. One afternoon, Richard was in Julie's office reviewing financial reports when a woman burst into the waiting room crying. Julie immediately went to her. The woman, Teresa Lopez, explained that her teenage son had been in a bicycle accident and needed stitches, but she'd been afraid to take him to the emergency room because of the cost. "Bring him in right now," Julie said. "We'll take care of him." Within minutes, Teresa's son was being treated by one of the volunteer doctors. His injuries weren't serious, but without immediate care, they could have become infected. Teresa sobbed with relief. "I was so scared. I didn't know where to turn." "You don't have to be scared anymore," Julie told her. "This is what we're here for." Richard watched this interaction and felt profoundly grateful. This was exactly what he'd hoped to create, a place where fear about cost didn't prevent people from getting care. The Murphy family remained deeply involved with the clinic. Tom Murphy started leading workshops on workplace safety, helping people understand their rights and how to avoid injuries on the job. Linda Murphy's free haircut program became so popular that she recruited other hairdressers to volunteer. Grace and Sophie continued their children's program, which had expanded to include tutoring and mentoring. Patricia Foster organized a monthly community dinner at the clinic where patients and volunteers gathered for food and fellowship. These dinners became beloved events, building connections between people who might otherwise never have met. As summer turned to fall, the clinic's impact became undeniable. Over 1,000 patients had received care. Dozens of families had avoided bankruptcy. Children had gotten vaccines and checkups they'd been missing. Chronic conditions were being managed before they became emergencies. The local news ran follow-up stories highlighting patient success stories. A woman who'd discovered early-stage breast cancer through a free screening. A man who'd gotten his diabetes under control after years of neglecting it. A child who'd received treatment for asthma that had kept her out of school. Richard's initial investment had been substantial, nearly $5 million for the building, equipment, and first year of operations. But he'd also established an endowment to keep the clinic running. Other donors had stepped forward too, inspired by his example. The clinic was becoming self-sustaining. "You've created something that will outlast all of us," Richard told Julie one evening as they reviewed patient statistics. "This clinic will help families for generations." "We created it together," Julie corrected. "You provided the resources, but the vision came from all of us, everyone who believed that healthcare should be accessible to everyone, regardless of their ability to pay." "My father would be so proud," Richard said quietly. "He always believed in using wealth to solve problems, not just accumulate more wealth." "He raised a good son," Julie said. "And through you, his legacy is helping hundreds of people." 1 year after the clinic opened, the staff organized an anniversary celebration. The event was planned for a Saturday afternoon, with food, music, and speeches from community members. Sophie and Grace were in charge of decorations, covering the clinic with streamers and balloons in bright colors. Julie had been feeling especially grateful that week. Her health was stable, her kidney function remained strong, and she loved her work at the clinic. Sophie was thriving in school, making good grades and lots of friends. Their lives had been transformed completely in just 18 months. On the morning of the celebration, Richard arrived early with a surprise. He asked Julie to gather the entire staff and all the volunteers in the main conference room. Over 60 people crowded in, curious about this unexpected meeting. "I want to thank all of you for making this clinic a success," Richard began. "When we started this project, I hoped it would help some people. But you've exceeded every expectation. In 1 year, you've treated over 1,500 patients. You've prevented countless medical emergencies. You've literally saved lives. The room filled with applause, but Richard held up his hand. I have an announcement to make. I'm establishing a permanent endowment of $25 million to ensure this clinic operates in perpetuity. No matter what happens in the economy or healthcare policy, this clinic will always be here for families who need it. The room erupted in cheers and tears. Julie covered her mouth in shock. $25 million. The clinic would never have to worry about funding again. But Richard wasn't finished. There's more. I'm also creating the Sophie Bennett Education Fund, which will provide full scholarships to children whose parents receive care at this clinic. Every child deserves the chance to pursue their dreams, regardless of their family's financial situation. Sophie, who had been sitting next to Grace in the back of the room, started crying. Her name on a scholarship fund. It was almost too much to process. And finally, Richard said, looking directly at Julie, I want to announce something that Dr. Morrison and I have been working on quietly. Julie, your recovery has been so successful that you're now eligible to be a living kidney donor. There's a patient on our waiting list who is a perfect match for you. If you're willing, you could save another life. Julie's hand flew to her mouth. Are you serious? I could donate a kidney. Dr. Morrison stepped forward. Your remaining kidney is functioning at 100% capacity. You could live a completely normal life with just one kidney, and you'd give someone else the gift you received, a chance to live. Julie didn't hesitate. Yes. Absolutely yes. Who is the patient? Her name is Rebecca Chen. She's 28 years old, a teacher, and she's been on the transplant waiting list for 3 years. Without a kidney, she has maybe 6 months to live. Julie's eyes filled with tears. When can we do the surgery? We'd need to do more tests, but potentially within a month. The room fell silent as people absorbed the magnitude of this moment. Julie Bennett, who had nearly died from kidney failure, was going to donate one of her recovered kidneys to save someone else. It was a perfect circle of kindness. Richard approached Julie and Sophie, who were holding each other tightly. This wasn't part of my plan, he admitted. This came from your hearts. But it's the most beautiful ending I could imagine. It's not an ending, Julie said firmly. It's a beginning. Every person we help here will go on to help others. Every life we save will touch dozens more lives. This is just the start of something that will ripple out forever. The anniversary celebration that afternoon was more joyful than anyone had anticipated. Over 500 people attended, patients, volunteers, donors, and community members. A local band played music. Children ran around the clinic's courtyard, laughing and playing. Families who had been helped by the clinic shared their stories. Teresa Lopez, whose son had received stitches on the clinic's opening day, spoke about how the clinic had become her family's medical home. I'm not afraid anymore, she said. I know that when my kids need help, this place will be here. Tom Murphy talked about how the clinic had saved his life by providing follow-up cardiac care he couldn't have afforded otherwise. Mr. Hayes and Julie gave me a second chance. Now I'm paying that forward by helping other men understand their health isn't something to ignore. Patricia Foster spoke about finding purpose in retirement. I thought my useful years were behind me. But this clinic showed me that service doesn't have an age limit. We can always find ways to help others. When it was Julie's turn to speak, she brought Sophie with her to the microphone. Mother and daughter stood together, both wearing bright dresses, Julie in green, Sophie in blue. 1 year ago, my daughter stood outside an antique shop in the rain, trying to sell her doll for $40, Julie said. She was 8 years old, and she was trying to save my life. That moment could have been the saddest moment of our lives. But instead, it became the beginning of something miraculous. Julie looked at Richard, who stood in the crowd. One man's kindness changed everything. But here's what I've learned. Kindness is contagious. When someone shows you compassion, it doesn't just help you. It inspires you to show compassion to others. Richard helped us, and now we're helping hundreds of families. Those families will help others. The ripples spread wider and wider. Sophie took the microphone. My grandma used to say that love is the most powerful thing in the world. She was right. Love made me try to sell my doll. Love made Mr. Hayes help us. Love built this clinic. Love is why my mom is going to donate her kidney to save someone else. Love always wins." The crowd applauded, many people crying openly. Richard felt his throat tighten with emotion. This little girl had taught him something profound, that true wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts, but in the lives you touched, the hope you gave, and the love you spread. As the sun set over Portland, the celebration continued. Sophie and Grace ran around with other children, their laughter filling the air. Julie stood with Linda Murphy and Patricia Foster, watching their kids play. Tom Murphy and Richard talked about plans to expand the clinic services even further. The Thomas Hayes Community Health Clinic glowed with light and life. Sophie's grandmother's doll watched over everything from its glass case, a reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures of sacrifice and love could change the world. The little girl who had tried to sell her doll had become a symbol of hope. The nurse who had shown kindness, without expecting anything in return, had found redemption and purpose. And the billionaire who could have done anything with his wealth had chosen to use it for love. In the end, that's what mattered most. Not the money, not the recognition, but the simple truth that when people choose kindness, when they choose love, when they choose to help each other, miracles happen. The Portland miracle wasn't about one man's generosity. It was about an entire community coming together to prove that compassion could conquer despair, that hope could overcome fear, and that love, always and forever, would win.